family? What's up, man? We back for episode 2 of The Ladder, man. I hope y'all enjoyed episode 1. If you didn't get a chance to see it, stop right now. Go back and watch it. It was a banger of all bangers. The best way to come back to the family. We dropped some straight fire, all right? So go check it out if you haven't seen it. That being said, you know what I'm saying? Now that you back, you don't watch episode 1. All right, let's jump into episode 2 of The Ladder. If you're new, right? This is a podcast presented by the Hope Institute. That is the Helping Others Pursue Excellence Institute. It is a conglomerate, right? It's a movement where we put others on our back and we try to move them towards their best selves, all right? And this podcast is called The Ladder for a reason. The reason it's called The Ladder is we want to give people an opportunity, a step up to get from where they are and where they want to be. So we dropping the ladder down. We taking you off of the level 1. We bring you up to level 2. And that's where we at. That's what we're doing here. And that's what you're going to do with us. Because now that you're tuned in, even if you don't want to be, you part of the crew. You are part of Crew Excellence, and I'm your host, Justin Strickland, your favorite Crew Excellence member, regardless of what your mama might say, all right? And I'm happy to be here and walk with you on this journey. I'm so grateful for you to be taking some time out your day and listen to this. You could be working like your boss wants you to be. But instead, you are here with me hanging out, and I'm so grateful for that. So let's jump into it. Like I said, last week was a banger. I got another one for y'all this week. I do not disappoint. All right. So before we jump into it, remember this podcast is predominantly about leadership. And so before I jump into it, I want to ask you a question. What is a leader that you look up to? And I want you to drop in the comments who they are and why you look up to them. Because I think some people might need to know about who other leaders are. A lot of times we just know what we know, but there's a lot of things we can learn from other people. And so they don't have to be famous, but just drop their names in the comment. It could be your moms, your grandpa, a school teacher. Who's a leader you look up to? Go ahead and drop a comment. Let me know. I'm gonna read all the comments. So I'm trying to see what all the dope leaders are around the world and how I can learn from them too if they have platforms that they utilize. All right. So drop a comment. Take a second. Who's a leader you look up to and why you look up to them? All right. Let's think about it. Once you think about it, I'll give you like 3 seconds because it's weird if I give you any longer than that. And I'm gonna talk about someone I look up to and why. Starting now. All right. So you had your 3 seconds. I hope you dropped it. You can pause the video. It is technology. All right, y'all can pause the video and type it down and come back and watch. But someone I look up to and why, I'm going to go with my mother. Okay. I'm going to keep it real G. I'm going to go with my mom's. The reason I look up to my mom's is she is walking in purpose every day, which I think is super dope. I was just talking to one of my friends the other day. Like, it's wild that some people get up every day and do stuff they don't like to do. Especially today, like we got so many opportunities and options in the world. It's not only wild to me, it saddens me. It makes me sad that people be sad that they gotta get up and go to work. Like, that makes me sad. And so, but my mom, she don't do that. She be happy as heck, singing in the morning, picking out her outfits the night before still. Like, she a 80s baby for sure. But like, she is excited every day to do things that God put her on earth to do. And that is inspiring for me. It's one of the reasons why I wake up every day excited to do the things I love to do, because I have positioned myself, because I think that's normal. I think that's regular to do the things you want to do. But for some of you, that's figuring out what it is you want to do. For some of you, that's where you are in life. You don't know what you want to do. So you're just doing something right now. That's okay to be in that season. But I just pray that eventually you find a way to know what you want and God creates space for you to do what you want. Okay. So let's jump into it. That's just a little intro tidbit today before we jump into the topic of the podcast. Last week we was talking about Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We talked about if you would follow him, and we talked about what his leadership would look like today. Today, we're going to talk about his adversary, the guy on the other side of the movement, Malcolm X. We're talking about Malcolm X, all right? Malcolm Little, as he was born, right? And we're going to discuss who he was in case you don't know a little bit of his backstory. Maybe you'll learn something today. We're going to talk about his leadership perspective. if he was royalty, voice, guru, or hero. Remember last week, Dr. King was voice. So voice leaders got a huge shout out last week. We're going to talk about Malcolm, his leadership perspective, what that would look like today, right? And we're going to talk about would you follow him? And you know what I'm saying? There'll be some dope stuff at the end. So make sure you're here all the way through as usual. Wow, you won't want to miss a thing. All right, so let's jump in. We'll talk about Malcolm X. Malcolm X was probably one of the most polarizing figures of the civil rights movement. And the reason being is he was part of one of the most polarizing organizations of the civil rights movement, the Nation of Islam, which let's do a little bit backstory before we get there. But he was probably the sole reason that the Nation of Islam blew up to what it was, especially in the 60s and 70s. Malcolm X is the reason why it became that. And so let's talk about who he was. He was born in Detroit, which is interesting to me because when I was growing up and I was seeing pictures of Malcolm X and thinking about Malcolm X, he seemed like an East Coast dude. Like, he moved like an East Coast dude. But he was born and raised in Detroit. Something that's super interesting is his parents was part of a civil rights movement before when Malcolm was little. No pun intended. But when he was younger, his parents were a part of Marcus Garvey's movement, which was a Pan-African movement, and his dad was the leader of the local chapter in Detroit. Most people believe that his dad was killed by the Detroit KKK chapter. And so that was a huge part of Malcolm's childhood, was his dad being murdered on a random night. And like I said, most people believe it was by the local KKK chapter because of the meetings and things his dad was hosting in regards to the Pan-African movement. That being said, Malcolm's childhood cannot have been more different than Martin's in the sense that Martin was an upright citizen, student, all of that. Malcolm was a hustler. So Malcolm leaves Detroit early teen years, about 15, 16. He goes to New York with it because his big sister lives there, and he's instantly one of the movers and shakers in the underground scene in New York. He is a pimp by all meanings of the words. He is a connector of people, and he becomes super important and aggressive into that kind of that nightlife scene. One thing that I think is super crazy is at the same time that Malcolm was making a name for himself in New York, Red Fox also was making a name for himself. And so Red Fox used to be in clubs, the same clubs that Malcolm was in. Red Fox is doing stand-up and things like that. Well, because Malcolm, most people, we don't really see it because we always see mostly black and white pictures. Malcolm X had red hair. He was a redhead. And so his name was Red. His nickname was Red. But because Red Fox was in New York too, they start calling him Detroit Red because he was from Detroit. And so I think that's just something interesting. And so, but yeah, he's in the streets. He's doing some things. He actually is pimping. He gets set and it's so interesting. He's pimping. He's with this white girl who's like his main chick. And she gets caught up by the police on prostitution and flips on Malcolm. And so Malcolm goes to jail because this white woman snitches on him, which is, you would think, if you know all the stuff about Malcolm X, that he wouldn't be with her, but that's because that's not who he was yet. And so he goes to jail, and Malcolm talks about this is probably the best thing that ever happened to him. He goes to jail, and he comes into contact with some guys that are in the Nation of Islam. He discovers their literature, he discovers their methodology, their lifestyle, and he converts to Nation of Islam. He actually gets a prison transfer because of his stand-up behavior after he converts. He gets connected with the Elijah Muhammad, and he gets out of jail fully invested in the Nation of Islam. What's so interesting is that once he gets out, the Nation of Islam is a smaller civil rights organization, mostly due to its very radical views. And so, and do your own research. I would love for you to study it and let me know what you see. But the Nation of Islam believes some pretty radical things about the world. They believe some different things about Jewish people, African people, about white people in general. And so much so that even before Malcolm had joined, the Nation of Islam had been deemed a radicalized organization by almost every standard. And that's what kept it so small. Yet here comes Malcolm, this dude who is probably invented the word charismatic. This dude, energy flows from Malcolm, which that's all pimps are charismatic, right? And so Malcolm, he joins and he's like, "What do you want me to do?" And he starts building chapters all around the country, driving in his hoopty, doing work for the Nation of Islam, doubling, tripling the members in a crazy amount of time. So he blows up so much that Elijah Muhammad is like, "Hey, this dude, I gotta bring him into the fold." And so he flies up the hierarchy in the Nation of Islam to where he becomes a minister, and they pay for his car, they pay for his house, and he's on staff for the Nation of Islam doing work for them. He ends up setting up the chapter in Harlem. And this is super important because Harlem is the birthplace of the Harlem Renaissance. This is where black politicians of the East Coast, this is where they are doing work. And it's such a different place than the South. And so most people don't understand why Malcolm and Martin didn't get along so well. And one of the reasons was they was from different worlds. And so Martin was from the South, where he was seeing Jim Crow, he was seeing people getting lynched, he was seeing all these things firsthand. Malcolm is from the city. He's from New York. And was racism real? For sure. But what Malcolm was dealing with was very different in scope and in methodology than what Martin was dealing with. And so he sets up the Harlem chapter, and the Harlem chapter becomes the center of the Nation of Islam. And what you got to understand about Malcolm's leadership is one of the reasons why he was able to build the nation so quickly was he truly believed that it was the best culture for black people to be a part of. And so he believed that if you became a member of the Nation of Islam, you were joining the culture that would produce success in your own life. And he believed it wholeheartedly. If you ever read anything about Malcolm, he didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he didn't have illicit relationships outside his marriage. Like he was a stand-up guy, fully bought into this way of life, and he was teaching others because it had changed his life. Malcolm X was a completely different person than Malcolm Little. And the Nation of Islam, he gave credit to the Nation of Islam for that change and that culture that they enacted. And so he was leading with culture, and it was doing great. He was doing numbers. But the issue was he was so charismatic, and his leadership style clashed directly with the leadership style of Elijah Muhammad. And Elijah Muhammad, and mostly Elijah Muhammad's children, his sons, they were very jealous of Malcolm because Malcolm was getting deferential treatment, and they were afraid that when Elijah Muhammad passed, that Elijah Muhammad would pass the baton to Malcolm and not them. And so there was some rivalry, some stuff within the organization. But what really moved Malcolm and what really changed him, and I'm flying through Malcolm's biography. If you ever watch the movie, it's a long movie and it goes way in depth. His book is really good. It goes way in depth. But I'm just flying because I really just want to set up who he was as a leader, right? This is a leadership podcast. We're talking about leadership and how they apply it. So I'm flying through the biography, and if I miss some points, forgive me. Drop them in the comments. Let other people know what you think is important that I missed, okay? But Malcolm, he starts to sit in on some of these things that the other groups are doing. Some of these nonviolent groups and some of these other organizations. He gets really in with the college kids and the sit-in. And Malcolm is like, "Hey, I think what y'all doing is really dope." They hit me. It's up. I'm like that. It's up with them. So they don't ever invite him to the sit-in because he wasn't really bought into the nonviolence, but he's impressed with their desire to engage in politics. And so that's what was so different between him and Elijah Muhammad. Elijah Muhammad viewed the Nation of Islam as existing outside of the nation's political landscape, where Malcolm wanted to engage the political landscape through the culture that the nation provided. And so they clashed a lot on that. They clashed so much that Elijah Muhammad forbade Malcolm from talking to reporters and from meeting with politicians because they did not think that that's what their organization should be doing. But Malcolm disobeyed, but he didn't care about that. And so he did what he wanted to do. And he met with God. He even met with Fidel Castro. It was one of the most famous meetings between political leaders on American soil. He met with Fidel Castro at a hotel as Fidel was starting the Cuban Revolution. And Fidel talks about how Malcolm made him feel at home, made him feel as if he belonged in Harlem, and how Fidel believed in the mission that Malcolm was pursuing. This mission was one of Pan-Africanism. So it connected back to his upbringing, which is so interesting as he grew up inside of a Pan-African movement, but joined the Nation of Islam. The Nation of Islam was not a Pan-African movement. It was an African-American movement. And Malcolm felt that they were selling themselves short. He felt like this culture that he was a part of could affect the world for the better. And so he went on break from the nation. And he went to Africa. He visited Africa. He visited the Middle East, and he visited with Muslims all over these other continents and these other places. And what's interesting is the Middle East, they didn't consider the people in the Nation of Islam Muslims. Because of their radical beliefs, they did not think that they were Muslim. And so a lot of people in the Middle East didn't necessarily accept Malcolm, but some did. And he was given great treatment, and he got to go to Mecca. And when he gets to Mecca, he got to see all these different people who were believed in the same Islamic culture that he believed in and didn't look like him, but loved on him. And this really challenged his engagement with the Nation of Islam so much so that when he came home, he got banished. He got kicked out of the Nation of Islam. And he started his own organization called OAAU, the Organization of Afro-American Unity. If you look at the tenets of OAAU, they're way different than Nation of Islam. Some of the same cultural ideals, but the vision was different because Malcolm was setting it. And he was looking for, he had tied progress in America for African Americans to progress in Africa for Africans. And he fully believed that neither could happen without the other. And so he was creating a culture within his organization that connected 53 different nations with African people in them together for progressive unity. Economic independence was the most important thing. And it was this ideal that until Black people control money and control their own economic well-being, they will be at the mercy of whoever, if that's the French or the British or the American government. And so he went around the world promoting this culture, and he was able to do some really dope things in a short amount of time. I think his organization only existed for a year before he was murdered. And so he wanted self-determination to be the number one motivator for African American people. And it's so funny. If you look at the bylaws of the organization, he wanted to ban the term integration. He didn't want no part of integration. And that was a cultural thing. He felt like the African American culture was strong enough and important enough to stand alone. And so that's why him and Martin clashed a lot, because Martin was pursuing integration and Malcolm was like, no, that's a bad ideal. And this is why. And one of the things that's so interesting about his leadership perspective, actually, before I say it, I want you all to guess. So I'm going to give a rundown again. Every time I'm going to keep giving you refreshers. Remember, if you want to take the quiz, hit the link, determine your leadership style. You can hop into an online course and develop yourself as a leader. Shameless plug. It's my podcast. I'm plugging. But I'm going to give a quick rundown of what the leadership perspective is of. I'm going to give you a chance to guess what you think Malcolm was. And then we're going to reveal his leadership perspective, apply it to today, and we're going to get out of here. All right. So first, we talked about voice last week. Voice leaders lead with the people. They gather people. They use their platforms to elevate people, to talk for the ones without opportunities to speak. They're high cause leaders. They always are fighting for something and against something. Okay, those are voice leaders. That's Martin Luther King. We got heroes. Heroes jump out of planes and ask questions later. They don't even care if they got a parachute. These leaders lead with action. They are always doing something, getting stuff done. They often end up isolated and alone, but they are very effective at accomplishing things, okay, and getting stuff done, right? Then you got gurus. Gurus lead with information, numbers, data, technology. They're driven by knowledge and they are very detail oriented leaders, and that's how they get things accomplished. And last but not least, you have royalty leaders who lead by culture. They lead by establishing ways of life and lifestyles, and they bring people into that culture, and that is how they establish people and help them become more successful. Which one do you think Malcolm X was? I'm gonna give you 3 seconds. Remember, you can pause, but if don't cheat, bro. That's what people be weird. Don't cheat. Like, put it down in the comments now before I say it. Don't be like, I knew it. Nah, don't cheat, bro. Put it in the comment and let me. I want to know if you get it. All right, I gave you a little bit of time. All right. Malcolm X was a royalty leader. Okay. He was a royalty leader. And I kind of primed you for that. I don't know if you was paying attention, but I hope you was. All right. But he was a royalty leader. And the reason Malcolm X was a royalty leader and not a voice leader is very, very important. Voice leaders are a part of the people. And what I mean by that is they don't necessarily establish culture, but they see what exists and they want to make change and they lead with change. Royalties leaders lead with culture. And so they lead with, this is who we should be. This is where we should go. And this is how we should do it. And Malcolm, that was his entire leadership perspective, which is why so many people didn't get along with Malcolm. That's one of the differences between Malcolm and Martin. Martin got along with a lot of different organizations. Malcolm did not. Malcolm, especially when he was inside the nation, even when he started his own organization, when he started his own organization, it was a little better. But when he's in the nation, people didn't mess with Malcolm. They thought he was radical. They thought he was uncompromising. They thought that he didn't play well with others. He's a kid in the sandbox kicking sand, right? And so they didn't mess with him. But the reason is because Malcolm believed that the nation had the best culture and everybody else doing other things were missing out on how they could really be successful. And if you look at the organization he started, if you look at the bylaws and you read what he was trying to do, it was a cultural movement where he was saying, no, we are one people, regardless of what country you live in, regardless of your citizenship. Ooh, that word tore me up. Status, regardless of your nationality. If you have African blood, you are one people. And we all need to work together to make each other successful. That is a cultural movement. That's an ideal that was started. Marcus Garvey is given the credit for that movement. And it's so interesting how Malcolm, so many years later, continued that same kind of ideal and identity. What would Malcolm X look like today? We talked about Martin last week. Malcolm, what would he look like today? This one was a little harder. I think for me, Martin was very easy for me to understand. It depends on which Malcolm we get, right? Because I could very much see Malcolm X being like Umar, Dr. Umar. In a lot of ways, Umar is he's pro-African American, he's pro-black, but his organization skills aren't great. If you read anything about Malcolm, this is one of the reasons when I grew up, especially when I was younger and I was studying leadership, I didn't really read a lot of Malcolm's stuff or put a lot of stake in Malcolm's leadership because he didn't get a lot of stuff done. As far as like laws and legal change and things like that, he did a lot for the culture. And that's why you see a lot of people will talk about Malcolm in glowing terms. And I think he deserves it. But he did a lot about changing kind of your mentality and challenging the culture. But as far as legislative changes, he wasn't really a part of any of them. But I think that he did a lot of work that challenged the way you saw yourself and challenged the way you saw the world. And I think that's kind of what Umar does. And I'm not an Umar fan. I ain't gonna hold you. But I think if you listen to Umar talk, a lot of what he's trying to do is challenge how you see yourself and how you see the world. And so I could see Malcolm having a platform very similar to that, where Malcolm would definitely have his own school. He would definitely have a cult-like following in a sense, but I think he would still be very polarizing. He would still be saying things and doing things that made people very uncomfortable, and made people and kept him out of the public eye. That's one thing that's very different in Malcolm's life and Martin's life is Malcolm was with the people all the time. Like his work was grassroots. That's his organization from the nation to the OOA to the OAAU. They were grassroots organizations. You didn't see Malcolm on TV. You ain't see Malcolm in a whole lot of newspapers or in a whole lot of political conversation. A lot of times, one, they were scared to invite him. Just being honest, they didn't want him there. They was terrified. But he was not mainstream material. His message, his culture was definitely threatening to the mainstream media and to the mainstream public. I think one of the ways most people were introduced in the country to Malcolm was when it was a police brutality case and he marched a lot of people down to the police station to retrieve someone and make sure they were safe. And it's from the movie. It's one of the most impactful parts of the movie is the cop tells another cop because Malcolm tells everybody to go home. He goes in front of it's blocks and blocks of black people like ready to get like that. And Malcolm, when he's satisfied with the results, he's like, everybody go home, and everybody turns and leaves. And the police officer turns to the other police officer like, hey, nobody should have that much power. And so Malcolm was dangerous. And so I don't think that Malcolm would have even to today, I don't think he would have the mainstream following that Martin would have. But I think it would be cult-like, and I think people would, the right people would appreciate what he had to offer and what he was saying. Would I follow Malcolm? No. Nah, I wouldn't follow Malcolm, but I would be aware of Malcolm in the same way that I'm aware of Umar and what he's doing and what he's saying. I would be aware of Malcolm. I would be aware of his movements, what he's up to. He operated in a different from a different foundation than I operate from, and so I would be opposed to that. But I would be aware of what he was doing, and I would recognize the importance of a lot of the work he was doing. But I myself would not be a part of his movement, which, I don't care if it's controversial, whatever. That might be the title. I ain't following Malcolm. What about you? And so drop in the comments, would you follow Malcolm X? And I don't want to, and be real. I think everybody in hindsight puts themselves I would have been marching. I would have been with Malcolm. Be honest. Would you be with Malcolm? Would you be doing grassroots organizing of people? Would you be Malcolm was on some live off the grid, get away from the man, don't work for corporate. Are you quitting your job? Are you being self-sustaining? And is that who you are? And if so, let me know. I would want to see who said they were following Malcolm so I could put in the comments that you're lying. And then we can go from there. But I'm excited to see who would follow Malcolm and who wouldn't. And for my royalty leaders, this one is for y'all. I got a shout out for you today. Create the culture that you desire to be successful in. Too often, as royalty leaders, we get hooked up with other people and other people's organizations, and we have to just do what we think is a status quo, and we are hindered and we feel smothered. Be free. Wherever you at, create a culture that you think allows people to be successful. Be kind to others, give vision to others, and be consistent. That's the most important part about royalty leader is you got to be consistent in relaying the vision to others. And I'm talking to y'all because this is coming from a royalty leader. Be consistent. If this is what you believe is the best culture, scream it from the mountaintops. Talk to other people about it. Bring some people in and expose them to their best self. You have something special. You know something special. Put it to paper. Put it to use. Create environments where people feel like they are at home when they're with you, when they're doing the work that you have laid before them. Because with that culture, with that vision, you can change the world. So if you my royalty, go ahead, drop a comment, put hashtag royalty if you a royalty leader. And if you don't know, hit the link. Go take the quiz. All right. You can find out. It's free. It is free. Yeah, I said it. Free. All right. Go take the quiz. Find out what your leadership perspective is. Royalty, dope. I love you because we one in the same. All right. Voice leaders, hey, this ain't about you today. Okay. And everybody else, don't feel left out. It'll be an episode for you. Hey, I'm your fearless host, your favorite Crew Excellence member. I'm so excited to have spent this time with you today. I hope that you enjoyed it. It blessed you.